So here I've got my frog example, and I have finished the blue part of my background, which essentially is going to look like it's even further away once I do the frog and this foreground space in acrylic paint, because acrylic is more opaque, so it will come forward more. Plus I am using more warm colors, some greens, yellows, oranges, reds, those types of colors primarily on the frog and this section. So what that's going to do even more is help the blue, the cool color, recede back in space and the warm colors come forward. So the space is one of the elements of art that I am using in this particular example. So as you can see, I've already got shape in there, I've already got texture in there. So now I'm going to be using space, but I will eventually also have color in there, because the entire thing is going to be mostly analogous colors between the blues, the greens, the yellows, those colors that are sort of in a row on the color wheel. But the first thing that I'm going to be doing before I paint the frog is this section, because it is under the frog's feet. So even though this section looks like it's in front of the frog, and it is pretty much in front of the frog, because I have the frog's feet on top of it, I'm going to do this section before I do the frog. Now in doing this section, I would want to go ahead and tape off this line here. So I'm going to go ahead and tear a piece of masking tape that will go across. I'm going to kill the sticky, which once again just means I'm going to press it into my pant leg so that it's not so sticky that it ruins the paper once I take it off. I'm going to also go ahead and tape this to the table. And remember, on a longer line such as this, you will have to sort of guide the tape. It will not necessarily stay in a straight line on its own. So then here I know that I'm going to be doing dark to light with my yellow, and I'm going to be doing every other with a certain yellow, and then the other ones with more of a sort of yellow-orange type color. So some will be golden yellow, some will be more of a yellow-orange, but they're going to be dark, and then they're going to get lighter as they come forward. So there are a couple different ways that we can do that. We can mix colors directly onto the palette, or we can mix directly onto the paper. We can also tape some of these sections off. So I will tape one of them off just to show you. I may end up taping them all off. So kill the sticky, put the tape down, go ahead and do the other side as well. Kill the sticky, put the tape down. And remember, acrylic paint is way more opaque than watercolor paint. But I'm going to go ahead and just start with my darker yellow in this section. You will still be working in layers, so it's okay if your first layer is not as smooth as you want it to be, because you can go back over that with another layer and smooth out those color transitions. And remember to go right up to the pencil line of your animal so that you don't have that halo around the animal. So now I'm going to go ahead and dip my brush into my next yellow while the first yellow is still wet. That way they blend together. And you can see that the yellows are starting to blend a little bit. I do still go sort of back and forth. So you see I'm bringing some of that yellow all the way down into the golden yellow. And then as I work my way back out, you see that it smooths out even more. So once again, it is going to be a bit of a process. There is going to be some layering involved, because right now, even though this is pretty smooth, it's not quite as smooth as I would like it to be. But I'm just going to be okay with that and know that I can smooth it out with a subsequent layer. going to go ahead and dip into my white. Go back into that yellow while it is still wet. And this is a very common shading technique with acrylic as well. So even in a smaller space, you can still work similarly to how I am doing. You would just use the white instead of as a color like I'm doing. You would use the white in the highlights, and your darker colors would be the shadows. You would add other colors into those shadows. And we can talk a lot more about exactly which colors you should be using in your shadows as you are working on your individual pieces, because it will differ for each person depending on what colors their animal is. So that might be my first layer of yellow. Now there are places where I want it to be a bit smoother, so I can just go back in with this middle yellow and bring that into the white more, so that starts to smooth out more. So already within that first layer, I'm going to do a little push-pull, a little back and forth between the color. Go directly into my darker yellow now. You'll see that the white is there. If you don't like the white being there, just rinse your brush off. Make sure you dry it before you dip it back into the acrylic. And then you can go back in. You always want to make sure you dry your brush off before you dip it into the next color, because you don't want excess water with your acrylic, because that will thin it out. Now, if you are someone who likes to use watercolor, but you want something a little more opaque like acrylic, that is actually a good way to use acrylic more similarly to watercolor. So if that's your preference, then that's totally fine. But if you are using acrylic the way that I am, to have it be more opaque, you want to make sure that you rinse your brush and dry it between dips in the paint. So now I'm going to go ahead and take the tape off. Pull at a 45-degree angle so that the edge is nice and crisp and clean. Go ahead and take this next layer off. And so then I've got one part of that sort of section here done. I'm going to go ahead and do one more in this particular video so you guys can see. Killing the sticky on my tape, and I'm going to skip a section and go ahead and tape this part down, because like I said, I'm going to do every other. So some will have this golden yellow that I am currently working with, and then some will have more of a yellow orange that I will mix before painting, and then we'll go back in and use. So right now I'm just going to rinse off my brush, dry it up, and I'm going to do the exact same process. I'm going to use that golden yellow in here. I'm going to paint around the hands. Although it is nice that acrylic is opaque, so if I do accidentally go over any of those lines on his hand, I can still fix them. I can still paint right back over it once I'm working on the frog. So just like I did with the acrylic, I'm going to make sure the tip of my brush is along that pencil line so that I can see the pencil line and know exactly where I'm putting the paint. Go ahead and put some of this yellow in there while it's still wet, just so I can go ahead and get them starting to blend. And you can definitely use more than one brush. Like if you have just 2 colors, or even if you have 3 colors and want to use 3 brushes, you can have sort of one brush per color, and then that will sometimes help with blending directly onto the paper, simply because you have multiple brushes for the colors that you are using, so you won't sort of run into that problem of one color being too overpowering, because each brush will be for a color. And remember, even if you have taken the tape off like I did on that one section, I could still go back into that section, either with adding more tape, or I could go back in without tape. Just because you removed the tape does not mean that you can't continue working in a certain section. Sometimes you have to go back in and you have to work and change things up a little bit, but you may not necessarily know that until you get another section further along. Because as I have said, and will continue to remind you guys, painting is relative. So each part will influence the rest. You will never just finish one whole part of a painting and then not have that affect any other part. It's all connected. Going directly in with my white now. Letting those colors blend. Being sure I go all the way up to the edges of the tape. So that might be sort of my first layer there. It may not necessarily be done. Both of those sections, in my opinion, still need a little bit more work, but I am going to go ahead and take the tape off. Because I'll work back into sections once I have the next color on there, so that I can see the whole thing developing as a group rather than complete individual steps. But I would go ahead and do every other one with these colors, and then the spaces in between, same exact concept, but I will mix my yellow orange in advance, so I will show you that process as well.